biggest barriers to growth for house building developers in general are these: the cost and availability of viable land, the cost and complexity and delays in the planning system. Now, on all of the surveys I've seen, those things are sort of like 40%, 40%, fairly equal in terms of how people, reported those things as how much of a problem they were. And then around 20% of the people surveyed usually say finance is a problem. Now, I can tell you from my own personal experience, as both a smaller developer and working for the biggest developer in the country, land and planning are the problems, and they always have been. Yeah. Now, if you've got the right land and the right planning, the finance thing tends to go away. It tends not to be a problem. Again, so it's all back to land and planning, and planning in particular is now worse, in my opinion, than it's ever been, certainly in my 40 years in the business. So the complexity of it is, off the scale. The delays are off the scale. The massive under-resourcing of the system is just bonkers. And in fact, that's one of the biggest problems. And as a result, we're building, nowhere near enough houses, and it looks like it's getting worse as things stand at the moment. Land planning are the key problems. One of the things that's become a real big problem is actually even getting stuff built. Years ago, it was, building stuff wasn't that difficult, actually. If you were a good builder, you knew what you were doing. Building stuff was sort of like the easy bit to a large extent. Now, even that's not so easy. There's a massive problem in this country with the availability of labour because people haven't been properly trained, and there's been not enough apprenticeships for years and years and years. Now we've got a massive skills shortage and a problem in the industry as well. And on top of that, in recent years, there's been massive issues with procurement, the cost and availability of materials, and build cost increases in general, which have really hit and wiped out a lot of developers and contractors and made development even less viable as costs have increased. Now, on top of that, there are loads of new standards and requirements coming into the industry. Some have come in already. Some are coming in over the next few years. And I'm not saying any of this is bad, by the way. I'm just really explaining the stuff. We've got increased building regulations, future home standard coming in, biodiversity net gain, lots of other environmental standards and all the rest of it. All of these things add cost and complexity to an already very, very difficult process. I actually think, building in a sustainable way, and in particular, protecting and looking after nature is a massively important thing. So, this is all good stuff which needs to happen, but we just need to, work out, well, okay, how do we actually get houses built and deal with all of the competing interests in the right way that gets us homes and environment we can all be happy with. That's the problem we need to solve. And, interestingly, I think I've just sort of gone some way there on my most recent development. And that was one of the things that sort of prompted me to create this podcast. I'm now very much into super sustainable development, building with nature. And I've been sort of applying all of that stuff for the last few years on all of my development. So, there is, I believe, a right way to develop and a good way to create stuff. It's definitely not easy. Right, just a quick one. Whether you are a massively experienced and well-established property developer already, or maybe you're a new or aspiring one, either way, you will know that it is really not easy to find viable opportunities to come up with the best scheme, the best design that's going to maximise the land value and fully de-risk things for you, and then to go on to get the very best planning permissions as quickly as possible. However experienced you are, you will know that that is not an easy thing. I have put together a super detailed scorecard based on my 40 years experience in this industry, reverse engineering everything that I've learned, including lots and lots of mistakes over the years, and everything I've done to maintain, touch wood, 100% planning track record. I'm pretty sure there will be stuff that you don't know. Go and do that scorecard. Find out just how good or not your current process is, and I absolutely guarantee you will learn at least a little something, if not a ton. So it's bit.ly millbank.com/MLA score, all in capitals. You can do the Millbank Land Academy scorecard. I absolutely guarantee you will find some interesting stuff and it will help you get much better deals. What is almost certainly the biggest mistake that most developers make, and that is being overly reliant on their consultants. Now, the reason that's a big problem is because our consultants, it isn't their job to know and do everything that we as developers need to know and do. Property development is complex and there's a lot of different interrelated parts of it. I often liken it to 10-dimensional chess. Seriously, you'll know if you've been doing it for a while, depending on what level you're at, that there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of experts you need, a lot of reports you need. All of that obviously feeds into the financial profitability and viability or not of a scheme. Obviously, we need to think about the negotiations with the landowners, the timescales, how long have we got to get planning, what would be the effects of a delay or a refusal. It's a big subject. And it's only us, finance, of course, I haven't even talked about development, finance, costs, interest rates. There's a lot of things that influence the success or not of a deal. And it is not any of the consultants' job to know about those things. It's only us in the middle as the developers that should and will know about all of these things. So, when developers become overly reliant on their consultants, now particularly architects and planning consultants, and think that they're going to just tell them all of the answers, that is usually where things can go very, very wrong. And in fact, I was prompted to actually talk about this week because I was having a chat with a chap the other day. In fact, he'd just done our development scorecard. So somewhere here, you'll find a link to a scorecard which basically tests your own knowledge and expertise in the area of land planning and development. So you should go and do that anyway, actually. I think you'll find it interesting. It'll be interesting to see what you score. This chap had done the scorecard. I ended up having a chat with him and we got onto the subject of one of his current deals, which was going not too well. So basically it was a site that he'd managed to secure on an option agreement. Now, luckily for him, really luckily for him, and very well done for him, he had managed to get a really long option agreement. He'd persuaded the landowner to give him a 5-year option. That is not usually what happens. Most option agreements are way shorter than that. That's a whole different subject, option agreements, which I will talk about in another episode. But what he'd done, this guy was actually worked as a land buyer for a developer. Stumbled across this little site. He'd just left one developer, didn't have a job, and he went in there and tied it up, secured it for himself, but was not used to doing the rest of the process, i.e. coming up with the right scheme, coming up with the right design, and then getting planning permission. In some organisations, that is the way it works. Sometimes land buyers' job is just to go out there, find sites, and then they sort of hand it over to the planning and development team. Other organisations, it's their job is to see it all the way through. Personally, I think the job should be to see it all the way through because, those things are linked. How can you really find the best sites if you don't know about what you might be able to do with those sites and the chances of getting planning on the sites? Anyway, that's not how it worked with this chap. He'd found the site, gone away, tied it up, very well done, negotiation-wise, got it on a 5-year option agreement. Now, whether he'd managed to negotiate and get it tied up at the right price or not, that's a whole another conversation that I didn't have with him. But he was asking me about, why it was taking him so long to get planning. The application had been in for a year. So he had a 1-year planning application, And the only correspondence or feedback he'd had from the planners was 2 emails. Yeah. Now, we know at the moment the planning system is, massively under pressure, and then the real estate and lots of local authorities, most of them, in fact, are massively under-resourced. So it's really hard to get stuff done. However, there is a way of getting it done, and getting it done as quickly as possible, and ending up with the right answer at the end, i.e. a permission rather than refusal, if and when you know how to do everything correctly and you do it in the right way. This guy did not know that, and he'd made the classic mistake that I'm telling you about today, which is basically assuming that his architect and planning consultant would go and do it all for him. So I asked him a couple of questions and was just like literally shocked and amazed at how the fact that none of it had been done very well. And then he said, well, what am I going to do? And I said, well, look, by the sounds of things, you just need to wait for your refusal. And he said, well, can't I appeal for non-determination? And I said, no, like you're well past time for, you've been into this for a year. You can't even appeal for non-determination. So, and he was massively shocked. And he said, well, why didn't the planning consultant tell me that? And I'm, well, one, maybe he should have told you, but 2, more importantly, you should have actually known. It's not the planning consultant's job to sort of negotiate the whole deal, and they are not going to go and do everything required to get you planning. A lot of them are just act as post boxes, and even the really, really good ones, they need to be instructed and guided, and you need to work together in a team in order to come up with the best outcome. Our job as developers really is to understand and see the bigger picture, and effectively to conduct the orchestra of other professionals. And the reason why this is all so important is because ultimately it is our money on the line, it is our what sits on the line, it is only us that's going to lose if things go wrong. Consultants all get paid whatever happens, and importantly, as I've said, it's not their job. And nowadays, of course, you've got so many consultants, architects and planners you're always going to have, but you've got ecology, you've got noise consultants, you've got daylight, sunlight, you've got highways, you've got arboriculturists. Depending on the site and the situation and location, there are a lot of experts that you need, whom need to be coordinated in order to come up with the right outcome for you ultimately, i.e. the optimum planning permission for a site. It's none of those people's job it's their job to do their little bits. It's not their job to guarantee the whole thing. Someone needs to be in charge of that. That's us. That's what we hopefully get the big rewards for if we're lucky. So, how do you do that? Well, if you're a massive organisation, so let's take 20 plus years ago, I was head of land at Barratt's, the biggest developer in the country. There, we had a whole ton of experts in-house. We've got a land director, a planning director, a technical director, a development director, a sales director, a construction director, all of whom get overseen by the managing director, and if it's a big site, even maybe the regional chairman or whatever that has to sign things off. So you've got a whole load of experts in-house, and even down below those, you've still got all of your outside experts and your consultants and stuff like that. So basically, there's a lot of knowledge in those big organisations in order to make sure everything gets done the right way. If you are a smaller developer, you're not going to have that, you're not going to be able to afford all of that. So it's all effectively going to be outsourced, which means you or me knowing how to manage that whole process is even more important. because really there's, if you've got a small team, there's not many people to do stuff. You do have to have a certain level of knowledge and ideally experience. Not everyone's got the experience because you've all got to start somewhere. Maybe you're just starting out or you've not been going for very long. I don't know. But you definitely need to get as much knowledge as you can. Because, as I say, ultimately it's you that needs to understand and drive the process. You cannot expect your consultants to do it all for you. The other alternative is go and get the very, very, very best of the best. Well, I mean, to be quite honest, you sort of need to be doing that anyway if you can and if you can afford it. But even then, they still need overseeing and managing properly. But with the best of the best, they will be able to do more of it, and they are more likely to see how things interact, how things link together, how and where things might be wrong. For example, you're using one of the very best planning consultants. You would hope that they would tell you that you've only got another couple of weeks before you can no longer appeal for non-determination, just to take that silly little example, yeah? Or, of course, now some big, very well-off organisations might appoint project managers or development consultants to effectively take the role of the developer, and it is their job to manage and to coordinate and to oversee everyone as well. Now, the problem for you or for us as a smaller developer, it's hard enough to get deals to work and things to stack anyway without inserting another layer of cost and management in there, i.e. a development consultant. And because all a development consultant is doing what you could and should be doing yourself. And interestingly, and this is possibly a little bit of a controversial statement, I don't actually think it's very rare that you will get a good development consultant, even then, that does and knows everything that they need to do and know. Because if they did, they would be actually out there doing it for themselves as a developer, making the proper money. And even though they might be sort of doing that sort of role and maybe been doing it a long time and have quite a bit of experience of deals, I got to tell you, when it is your own money and your own what's-its on the line, it becomes a whole different thing. So even if you could afford a development consultant, I don't actually really think there's any such thing as a really good hot development consultant anyway, because if they were, they'd be doing it for themselves. And as I say, that's a whole massive layer of expense you're inserting into a deal. And if it's certainly on smaller deals, it just won't wear. They just won't wear that type of cost. So we're really back to, whatever the case, back to how do you make it all happen? You just do need the knowledge and ideally experience, but certainly the knowledge. So it's one of the reasons I'm doing this, is trying to get that knowledge out there so that we can support and encourage and grow more smaller house builders and developers, so they don't make the expensive mistakes that will send them bankrupt before they've even started. So that is the biggest thing you need to look out for, being overly reliant on your consultants. And I know, it seems like, well, they're the professionals, I pay them a lot of money, surely they should get everything right. Well, yes, in theory, but as we all know in life, whether it's architects, doctors, dentists, or mechanics, whatever it is, there's good ones and there's not so good ones. And unfortunately, there's a lot more not good ones in the industry than there are really, really good ones. And even with the good ones, we got to know it ourselves, because it's our job to coordinate and instruct them. So interestingly, just on that, I've sort of reverse engineered. One of the reasons I know this is I've literally reverse engineered all of the deals that I've done over many, many years to look at all of the steps. What's worked well, what's gone wrong, what do you need to know, what don't you need to do, based on my own deals and the deals of the big house builders that I used to work for, and sort of broken the whole process down into a step-by-step system that I've actually called the Insider system. And the acronym
spells out the key things that you got to know and do, starting with identifying off-market sites right up until the end when you realise your profit and exit the deal. But the key remember, and it's called in the insider framework because it's the insider knowledge that you really need to know in order to get deals done the right way. The I in the middle, and this is the important thing to remember, is called instruct. It's not called ask. It's called instruct because it is our job to understand and instruct and put together a really detailed document for our professional team that sets out exactly what you're trying to do, and then you have to manage them. So you're instructing them. You're not asking them. We're in the middle. We're conducting the orchestra. We need a certain amount of knowledge to do that. As I say, it is like 10-dimensional chess. It's definitely not easy money. It is high risk, high reward. In order to get those high rewards, you've got to manage everything properly, which does mean a lot of knowledge, or as much as you can gain for yourself. So basically, that's it. Hopefully, that's been of some use. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.